Buying a Timex Marlin Snoopy at a reasonable price seemed like an impossible challenge. But recently, I was lucky enough to find one at a great price. Hello, you're watching James. My name's James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm talking about a Timex Marlin. In particular, one of the Snoopy editions. This has been on my radar for some time. In fact, I like the Marlin watches in general. I think they're great, so I've wanted to own a Marlin, but I particularly liked the Snoopy editions because I liked the fun factor that was sort of linked to those watches and that I think I would experience from those watches. But the problem is, they are a little bit expensive, or at least my perception of them was that they were a little bit expensive, because if you want to buy the one that I'm going to show you today, they are around about 450 Australian dollars. And that's if you can find one, because these watches do tend to sell out really quickly and it is actually hard to get hands on with them. I was lucky because I just happened to stumble across this particular Timex on affordablewatches and it was around about half that price. I'm really glad that I didn't think about it too much and I hit that buy it now button, because they sold out in less than a day. So you can't get one from Ashford anymore. I do apologise if you want to buy one at this price. It's going to be a challenge, but as I've shown, it's not impossible. But now that I've had this watch in hand and now that I've realised how much I enjoy it, I'm starting to rethink that price tag of 450 Australian dollars, and try to think about whether or not that is actually the right price for this watch. I know I've been able to get this one at a bargain, but that may not have happened. And is this watch possibly worth the money that they're generally asking for it? And I want to answer that question. I want to answer the question, is this Timex Marlin, is the Snoopy editions worth 450 Australian dollars? And I'm going to answer that question, but I'll do it at the end of the video. For the moment, I actually want to fully review this watch because I've been wearing it for a few months now and I feel that I have a really good understanding of it. So let's flip the camera and let's check out this Timex Marlin Snoopy. So on paper, this Timex Marlin Snoopy doesn't exactly jump off the page. A watch with only 50 meters of water resistance, a mineral crystal, and a watch powered by the Miyota 8215 doesn't exactly sort of get me excited. However, that's not exactly why I bought this watch. Obviously, a big reason why I bought this watch was for this general sort of vintage aesthetics, but also this very cool dial. What also grabbed my attention about this one was the dimensions, because we have a case of exactly 40 millimeters. It is 13.4 millimeters wide, has a lug to lug of 47.8, 20 millimeter lug width, although online they keep saying it's 19 millimeters, but it's not, it's definitely 20, and it weighs 55 grams on this supplied leather strap. That was definitely one of the reasons why I bought this watch, because of those dimensions. But I also bought it because I really wanted to have this vintage inspired sort of Marlin Timex watch. I also wanted the fun factor of the Snoopy, but I also really liked this silver dial because it really stands out to me. It is actually quite a beautiful silver sunburst dial which just grabbed my attention, and it has continued to grab my attention. And not only is that beautiful silver sunburst dial lovely, but if you check out the edges of it, you'll notice that it actually curves down and away right at the edges. It's a really interesting effect that is then exaggerated slightly by this single domed mineral crystal. Initially, I wasn't sure, perhaps it was just the domed crystal that was making that effect, but from what I can tell, it actually curves down and away, which I think looks fantastic. On that curvature section, you'll see in black, there is the little minute track printed. Timex is also printed in black. There's a tiny little date window there at the 3 o'clock, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. The hands are completely black, which means it does really sort of then stand out from that silver dial. They are filled with lume. That's the only lume that is on this dial, as you can see, and it's not the greatest lume, and I probably would not have expected that. To be honest, I'm not really that phased about the lume. I just think the lume itself in those hands probably give it a good effect during daylight hours or in the light. But I do love this lovely pop of yellow from that second hand. Really does stand out against those black hands and this silver dial. And of course, we've got this fantastic Snoopy hugging Woodstock there, right there at the 6 o'clock. And if you look at that really closely, you'll see that the paint is actually applied with quite a generous amount, giving it a slightly, and only slightly, but almost 3D effect. Sitting above that dial and sitting above Snoopy and Woodstock is a really tall piece of mineral crystal. Single dome, so you can see that slight distortion, but look how tall it sits over the dial. It's huge, which actually gives it a really interesting look, and I actually quite like it, and I love how it transitions down into that case. It has a perfect angle that then hits the case and continues down, which I really like. The entire case all polished, which is probably not normally my favorite, but I guess it does sort of suit this style of watch somewhat. But what I absolutely do love is the case. Check out the angles of that case. So it sort of goes up, across and down, but it's all sort of one piece of steel, which I think looks, and it actually then feels really nice on wrist too. But as you can see, all of it polished, including the lugs, inside the lugs, sides of the lugs, sides of the case, all polished. This watch does not have a screw down crown, so it's straight to manually winding, because this Miyota movement does have hand winding, does have a quick set date position, but you'll notice in the final position does not stop that second hand. So this Miyota movement does not have a hacking feature, but you can see it once you turn this watch over. So you have a see-through case back, showing off a little bit of information about being a 50 meters water resistant stainless steel automatic movement. And there is that Miyota movement with a custom rotor there saying Timex. But it is always really interesting to see what these movements are like on my time grapher. So let's see how this one is performing. So it really feels like this one is actually performing okay for this type of movement. 21,600 vibrations per hour, a tiny little bit of beat error, good amplitude, and running about 10 seconds plus per day. But being this sort of Miyota movement, it means it has that sort of single directional winding, which gives you that little bit of wobble, which means it does make a little bit of noise. However, wearing this one on the wrist, I haven't really noticed that too much. Some of these movements do make a little bit more noise, possibly partly to do with the construction in the case. This one, you can hear it, but it's not too bad. I don't mind it too much. What I do rather like is this leather strap that came with it. Even better than I expected. I expected it to be a little bit cheap, to be honest. Has a signed kind of buckle there, but it is really soft, really nice, little sort of accents of stitching there, and also quick release spring bars. And with dimensions like this, it's always pretty much guaranteed to fit my wrist, and it absolutely does. The only question then is how it sits down on wrist, and as you can see, it actually sits down really nice. There is a tiny bit of hover there when it comes to those lugs, but only a little bit, and you don't notice it when you're actually looking down at the watch. So what do I like about this watch? What don't I like about it? And what would I change? Because that's worth noting this time, because there's lots to like. I absolutely adore this silver dial. It is something a little bit extra special. It's really noticeable, especially in the outdoors when the light hits it. Love the poppy yellow from that yellow second hand. Snoopy is obviously fantastic. He's one of the main reasons why I ended up buying this particular watch. The size of the case and that case shape. I really, really like that case shape. It's something a little bit special, but what ruins it a little bit for me, and it's only a little bit, is that date window there at the 3 o'clock. It's not even so much that there's a date. I think it could definitely do without a date completely, but it's so tiny and small, which I know this movement is sort of known for, but it just looks out of place and kind of ruins this beautiful dial. So that means there's a few things that I would actually like to change. Number one, get rid of that date. Imagine how beautifully clean looking that dial would be without it. But I also think the hands need to be slightly bigger, possibly just a fraction bigger. And that second hand, as much as I like it, I think it looks too short. It should be a little bit longer. And if I was able to make a major change with this watch, I'd love to see it with a sort of 9000 series Miyota movement. Imagine how nice it would be having that high beat movement in there, seeing that second tick away a little bit quicker. And all of that brings me back to the price of this watch, because that was a big factor in why I initially didn't buy one. So I want to discuss that in a lot more detail. And to do that, let's get back to me. Every time I saw a Timex Marlin come up for sale, or I saw a video about a Timex Marlin, I thought, wow, I really like those. I really want one of those in my collection. But every time I then went on that search for them, I couldn't find one at the right price. I kept thinking that the price tag of these watches was too high. And this one today, this Timex Marlin Snoopy, is listed at around about 450 Australian dollars, and that felt like too much money. That's why I didn't buy it at that price. That's why I only bought it when it was on this half price special. But when it actually arrived on my doorstep, when I actually started to look at this watch, think about this watch and wear this watch, I started to understand that price tag a lot more. Now, as I just mentioned, there are a number of things about this watch that I still would like to change if I could. But obviously I can't change those things, so I just need to look at the watch as it is. And I think for $450, it actually might be okay priced. Yes, okay, the movement may not be perfect. Yes, okay, it's not sapphire crystal. Yes, okay, there's a few things I definitely would change. But I'm starting to think, actually, this is actually a reasonable price. And I'm not really sure why I was thinking it was so expensive before. But if you're going to spend $450 on a vintage-inspired dress watch, well, there's lots of other options out there. There's lots of other options out there that may even be considered better value. Perhaps have better movements, perhaps have those sapphire crystals and some of those specifications. But I have to say, because I've looked, I don't actually like any of them more than this Timex. In fact, I'm sure that I like this Timex more than them. Yes, they may on paper be better watches, but that doesn't mean I like them more. And liking a watch is better than being a better watch, if you know what I mean. I think you need to have that connection with a watch. It ends up meaning that that watch will stay in your collection, whereas other watches, which may feel like they should be better, end up leaving your collection. And that's why I actually think at $450, this Timex may be worth considering. And it also may be worth considering watching these videos next.